Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafting. Today I have a fun tutorial to show you today of how I created this cute little scarecrow using a piece of wood from my scrap pile and a pair of upcycled blue jeans I found at my local thrift store. Today the video is also a part of a YouTube collaboration called What Would You Make? It's a monthly collaboration, and today we have three hosts. We have Brenda with Rustic Lace DIY, Barbara with Country Lily Decor, and Christine with DIY Craftaholic. Now you're going to find the links to all of their channels inside of my description box, as well as the playlist of all the other creators that are a part of today's collaboration. You're definitely going to want to take some time, watch the playlist. If you like to create with wood, I'm sure you're going to be inspired. There's so many wonderful creators inside of this playlist. Well, let's go ahead and start, and I'll show you the beginning steps. The wood for my scrap pile was a 2x8, so I went ahead and I just cut it into a square shape. The blue jeans I found were from my local thrift store. It already has some of the tattered and tears on it, so that was one of the reasons why I grabbed it. And I happen to be lucky that I live in an area where blue jeans and thrift stores are not that expensive. So I think I picked this up for about $2 for these pairs. Now this particular pair also has Lycra in it, so I'm going to get a little help because it's going to stretch and it's going to hold tight onto my piece of wood. So I basically put it on at the top of the leg instead of the bottom, because that's where most of the room is, and just slid it down until it felt tight. Now if you don't happen to have jeans that would have Lycra in it, you could always just cut your fabric and glue it in the back to make it fit yours. I just went up a little higher. I wasn't exactly for sure how tall I wanted to make my hat, so I left extra length on there just to make sure I would have enough room to be able to do what I wanted to. Again, it's kind of like just creating things as you're going. Give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in case you need to make a change. And on the bottom, I just chose to leave it a little bit longer there. I'd already used the pocket on this particular jean for a little bit more of a different project, so I just went by the hole I had there and I just cut it off. I thought a little bit on the bottom might look nice to be able to add a fringe around the bottom of my scarecrow. The other leg I was going to use to make my hat, so I wanted to be able to cut it off towards the top of the pants. And again, I just kind of looked at my square and then figured out how much length I might need. I was really excited because it had those little rips in it with the patches already on the back, so the holes didn't go all the way through, so I thought it would work perfect for this. I just went ahead and made a slit along the side. I do end up having to make some adjustments when I get my piece already cut. Oh, this is a trick I wanted to share. Pulling threads on some fabrics are really super hard on my hand. So if I just take a rock, this I just get from outside, it had kind of a little bit of an angled edge on it, so a little sharper edge, and I just use that to scrape against this denim fabric, and it creates a nice bit of a tattered looking edge. I was going to use the warm and natural batting to be able to create a little bit more strength to the inside of my hat. This fabric works great for that. I'm also going to be using like a 16 gauge wire. It's a little bit more firmer, so I'll be able to add some more structure to my hat so it won't just flap down when I get it on my scarecrow's head. This will allow me be able to actually bend it and create the look I want. So here I'm just kind of measuring it, eyeballing it to see how much I might need. I bought it at my local Menards store, so it's easy find. It's an easy find to be able to get that wire. All I did was lay my leg down, or the top of my hat for my hat. I just laid it down on that batting and just cut around it for a general shape. Once I had it cut, I was able to put it on the inside and then fold it over, and this is where I needed to make a few adjustments. My fabric wasn't quite even all the way down because that leg had a tapered edge to it. I needed to be able to fill it in, so I just cut another piece of the denim and pieced it in basically. You wouldn't be able to notice it that much. It was going to be on the underside, and so all I wanted to do basically was to cover up that area. So I simply cut a piece and then I just glued it. I'm using hot glue to glue my hat together. And then I just added a little extra on the edges. I cut my batting even with my denim, and I also do the roughing up on those edges as well. You can see how I pieced it together. That's going to work perfectly. So once I have it all figured out for the sizing, I take my wire and I just shape it generally on the inside. This is what I'm going to be using for the form to be able to bend my hat and also to hold my hat up so it just doesn't flop over on the sides. Once I have my wire shaped, I'm going to take some scrap fabric. This just happens to be a thicker canvas that I used, and I'm just going to glue tabs around my wire. This will help hold my wire in place so I can attach the fabric all the way around. For this step of attaching the fabric to the cotton batting, I just simply used hot glue. Started at one end and then worked my way around. Hot glue does dry quickly, so you don't want to go too far. You want to start slowly, go around your edges, and just add it on. And here's where I just piece that piece in. Simply using hot glue on both of the fabrics, it held fine. It's just a decor piece. It's not going outside or anything, so the hot glue should work fine for this step. Once you have the one side glued, go ahead and flip it over and begin the other side. Having that wire attached with those little scrappers of fabric really does help with this task of gluing. Again, I'm just going slowly down the edges and then sticking my fabric down as I go. This is the best way to do it so your glue doesn't get too dry too quick. It gives you plenty of time to get your fabric attached. To add a little bit more rustic look to that cotton batting, I took the side of my scissors and I roughed it back and forth on the cotton. This helped to break up the fibers a little bit and created this wonderful little fuzzy edge. I really liked it, and it was simple to do. My plan for the hat was to slide it over the top of the fabric and then place it down over the wood piece. So what I wanted to do was to make sure I had my hat somewhat even on each side. So I just felt for the side of my wood and made a mark on each side, and this would give me an idea of where I wanted to cut the slit. I was going to be creating a slit very similar to what a tissue box would be. So I cut the top layer first, and then I went down and cut the batting and then the final layer underneath. It was much easier to do it this way than to try to do all 3 layers at one time. Once I had a rough hole cut, I basically took my fabric, placed it through the slit, and then pulled it all the way down to the wood piece. I wanted it to fit snugly, so I didn't want to cut it too wide, so I just made adjustments as I went. I used a piece of coffee-stained muslin to create the face area for my scarecrow. I didn't want to paint it on the dark denim. I wanted a lighter background, and this fabric worked perfect. To help create a little bit more of a whimsical look for my scarecrow, I chose to use 2 different buttons. I always love to have string inside of my buttons when I use them, so I just use a little bit of embroidery floss. To create the nose, I did use fabric again, but this time I used a little bit heavier canvas material to do this. I wanted a little bit more structure. I created it more of a triangle shape. After I cut it, if you just roll that little piece of fabric in your hand and then you open it up, it really does add a little bit more of a tattered edge to your fabric. Simple, easy way to create a tattered edge. I knew I wanted to have an interesting nose as well, so I chose another fabric to place on top of that canvas one. This way I could add a little bit more pattern, a little bit more interest to that nose instead of just using one fabric. By tearing the edges, I could get more of that tattered look. I also rolled it in my hand. This really does work well to create those tattered edges that look so great on these rustic pieces. Once I had my pieces figured out, I needed to make the decision whether I was going to sew them down or glue them down. I decided to go ahead and glue them down, and I chose to use the Clear Gel Tacky Glue by Aleene's. This was going to work much better than using hot glue. Often when you use hot glue, you'll end up with a slight ridge all the way around where the glue is. It doesn't quite sink all the way down into the fabric. But the clear tacky glue works well for this and does sink down into the fabric, and I shouldn't have a ridge. The muslin is a fairly thin fabric, and if I used hot glue, you would definitely notice where my glue is. So by using this, I solved that problem of not having ridges. To line up my pieces of my face, I put the eyes down, and then I also put my nose pieces down. This way it allowed me to take a look of where I wanted it to be centered. I did end up using some hot glue for my buttons though. There was a little bit of an issue though. Those holes are fairly large in the buttons that I chose, and the hot glue did kind of go up through my holes. So I had wished that maybe I had used the Eileen's tacky glue for that as well, and maybe I wouldn't have had so much squishing of glue. I went ahead and used that clear tacky glue as for my nose for the same reasons I chose it for the muslin. You still kind of see the line around my muslin right now because it's not dry, but once it dried, the line kind of disappears. Up next was to add a few more details to my face. I chose to use a black Posca pen for this procedure. A good tip for when you're using Posca pens is to make sure if you need to charge your pen, to do it off to the side before you actually place your pen on your project you're working on. Another good tip is to always pull that pen towards you. There's going to be less chance of the flicking up extra paint and getting dots where you don't want them. It just works better if you pull an even line towards you. Now to do the little mouth, I chose to do some X's. I started with one in the middle and then two off to each side and then went up one more on each side to give it more of an even look. To create the cheeks, I just simply used some inexpensive blush from my dollar store. I started with a pink and you just rub it onto your fabric and it'll stick fairly well. But after getting the pink on, I decided that it was a little bit too much pink for this rustic looking scarecrow. So I had another blush that was more of a rusty looking to it, and it had little speckles of glitter in it. So I thought, why not go ahead and layer my blush? So I just simply added another layer on there, and I thought it looked nice at the end. The raffia is what I was going to use for the hair of my scarecrow. I created those little bundles using tape, and I was going to just hot glue those little bundles around my little scarecrow to create the hair. Now it was time to go ahead and decide how tall I wanted the hat. I really did like all that little extra distressing already on the blue jean, so I decided to go ahead and leave it tall. I simply used some polyfill and pulled it apart so it was nice and fluffy, and then just began to fill my hat. When you put the polyfill in, just make sure you're pushing it all the way over to the edges and get it nice and full. I thought it looked best to have a big puffiness to my hat. The more fiber fill you put in there and the puffier it is, the more it's going to stay upright and won't bend over. I went ahead and took one of those raffias, little extra raffia, a short one that I had thought maybe I'd use for my hair. I went ahead and took one of those and I put it in the top of my scarecrow's hat just to give it a little bit of extra whimsy. To close the top up, I just simply used some jute twine and tied a simple little shoe bow at the top. This way it held in the raffia and kept the top of my hat closed. I didn't even add any glue. I think this will work perfectly just to hold everything in. I like the simpleness of the bow, and adding the jute twine just added a little bit more rustic to my scarecrow. When adding the raffia bundles on, I simply just tipped the hat up a little ways so my raffia would be slightly underneath my hat. By having the tape around the bundles, it really helped keep all of the raffia together and you don't end up burning your fingers so much. This way you have little clumps of hair and it helps spread out the hair all the way around. I knew I wanted to put raffia in the back as well. I might be displaying this on a table come fall and I wanted to be able to see it all the way around. When choosing the length of my raffia, I decided to make it a little bit longer right away. I knew I could always give it a little bit of a haircut and make it the length I wanted it. This is where you can see how helpful it is to have that wire inside of the hat. I can simply bend it and shape it, and it holds it nicely so it doesn't just droop down on my scarecrow's face. One last item is I wanted to add a big old messy bow, and I had some beautiful fabrics left over from last year's project, and this would make the perfect little accent to my hat. I wanted to say a special thank you to Brenda, Barbara, and Christine for hosting today's collaboration. Take a little bit of time and check out their channels. As well as that, click that playlist and watch all of the rest of the creators in today's collaboration. We have lots of talent inside of there, and I'm sure you'll be inspired to create something. One last final detail. I wanted to even add a little bit more whimsy and get a little help covering up those tape bundles. An Excelsior is the perfect thing to do it. It has a great whimsical look to it, and just adding those little tiny little bits of nest almost over the tape really did cover it up. And there he is, cute as can be. If you might be new to my channel and you like doing art and other creative things, consider subscribing to my channel. I do weekly art tutorials there. I do painting, watercolor, mixed media, all the fun things. Go ahead and click that bell so you get a notification of when I put up my new tutorial. Leave me a comment and let me know if you might make this friendly little guy for your fall decorations. Thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and see me again.